Top Gear Pocket, released in 1999 for Game Boy Color from Kemco, is one of the few GBC cartridges to include a built-in rumble pack, which rumbles with the help of one AA battery. However, since I've been playing this on a Game Boy player on my Nintendo GameCube, and I quite frankly never really cared for rumble functionality to begin with, especially on the Game Boy Color where it just kind of looks awkward, it's a relative non-issue, though I imagine some people would appreciate this feature. Top Gear Pocket is a racing game where you race on closed circuits against other cars in an attempt to win the race, or at least assume one of the top 3 positions. You have 3 modes of play: Championship, where you can play and unlock cars and tracks, Time Attack, and a Versus mode where you play against other players via Game Link functionality. Now, some disclosure here. A couple years ago we looked at the sequel, Top Gear Pocket 2, which did not have a rumble pack built in coincidentally, and I thought it was a largely enjoyable little racing game. So in making the jump to that game's predecessor, Top Gear Pocket the First is a naturally similar racer with similar features. Now I'm going to get this out of the way. If I had played this first game first and the sequel later on, I probably would have been a little easier on this game, because Top Gear Pocket is essentially a lesser package with fewer modes, features, and oh yeah, a password system, as opposed to a battery save that number 2 would implement. So basically in playing this, I was spoiled by how good the sequel was, that going back to this first title... well, I'm gonna tell you straight up. Top Gear Pocket 2 is the better deal due to having more stuff, and also, if we're gonna be honest, it's a much better playing game. Now, it's not all bad with number 1. If anything, taking the sequel out of the equation for a moment here, Top Gear Pocket is a relatively decent little racer on the Game Boy Color. With about 7-ish tracks and about a dozen or so cars to play with, there's certainly more than enough replay value to keep you busy until you've mastered all the tracks. You only start with a couple of each, but as you win races in the Champion mode, you'll eventually unlock more stuff, more cars, more tracks. It's a pity your progress is recorded via password as opposed to a more convenient save feature, but fortunately the passwords in Top Gear Pocket are short, sweet, and uncomplicated. So they're fairly easy to jot down and memorize, or whatever the case may be. Control for the most part is pretty solid, responsive, and even the turns were manageable, with maybe one tiny quibble that we'll touch on in a little bit. There's various road conditions that affect your driving, tarmac being the smoothest ride and others such as gravel, ice, or snow being more problematic. The choice of car usually alleviates these problems, but not all the way through. One thing I noticed with Top Gear Pocket is that it actually has spinouts, which usually occur whenever you drive to the curb, and it stalls you for a bit before you're able to continue onwards. This seems like a no-brainer since most racing games, especially of this era, had such things, usually a crash animation or explosive animations, things like that, but you're going to want to avoid these at all costs because these are actually very detrimental to your performance, as they take a ridiculously long time to recover from, and too many of them could cost you the race. For those wondering why this sounds like a notable thing, spinouts are non-existent in Top Gear Pocket 2. You crash into something, you just slow down, but you're able to recover rather quickly. And while the lack of spinouts made that game somewhat easier, it also made the game a little more enjoyable. Spinouts in Pocket 1 are less of a challenge to overcome and more of a nuisance, and the fact that it is very easy to spin out even when there shouldn't be any reason to do so, and this is mostly hitting the curb. If you hit another car, you usually just stop and that's it. But the very easy spinouts on the curb does make the racing a bit frustrating, especially on tracks with generally poor surface traction. It's probably a good thing why they removed them from the sequel. Top Gear Pocket has smooth scaling animation in terms of the terrain and an overall clean look for its visuals. Each of the various tracks has its own unique backgrounds and roadside elements, which look pleasant enough. The cars look fairly decent and distinct from each other. Overall presentation's fairly decent. Sounds alright. When you're in menus, intermissions, or the like, you have some upbeat music greeting you throughout, and there are adequate chiptunes all around. And there's even a sound test you could list the tunes in, but during the actual gameplay, you'll only have the engine sound, which does get tiresome after a while. The skidding and braking sounds aren't too bad either, and the spin-out sound effect is appropriately annoying, so that's something. Overall, Top Gear Pocket is a fairly average quality racing game for the Game Boy Color, whose only real highlight is providing the base gameplay for a far superior sequel. It's not to say the game's bad, because it isn't. It's more than adequate, there's enough to keep you relatively busy for the short term, and there's a bit of fun to be had so long as you're not prone to constant spinouts, which is the big killer to the fun factor. That having been said, while Top Gear Pocket 1 is an okay racer, you'd be best served playing Top Gear Pocket 2 instead. Might not have a rumble pack built in, but it's got more features, it's a bit more playable, and it's an all-around better package.